I'm Phil Nixon. I'm an extension entomologist with the University of Illinois and have expertise in insects associated with trees, shrubs, turf, and households and around the home. Tonight we're going to talk about mosquitoes and West Nile virus. Go through a variety of mosquitoes that we have in Illinois, some of the more important ones that we have, and finish up with talk about some diseases and finish up with information associated with how mosquitoes are monitored and so on, and how management is done in Illinois and most of the rest of the country. We will try to have a break towards the middle sometime where you can ask questions, but feel free to type in questions as I go along. If I notice them, I'll answer them. Obviously, if I don't notice them for a while, I won't. So I'll kind of keep my eye there, but I get involved in teaching and forget to look for other things. So realize that if that's the case. When we look at mosquitoes, they are a type of fly. They're a relatively slightly built fly, and they have long legs, long slender legs, and like all flies have only one pair of wings. The second pair of wings are reduced in what are called halteres, which are very short little structures that are used by the insect in balance. All mosquitoes have elongated tube-like mouth parts that they use for a couple different purposes. Female mosquitoes can be distinguished from male mosquitoes in that the male mosquitoes' antennae are not, female mosquitoes are not feathery; they're relatively straight, whereas those of a male mosquito have feathery structures on them. As you can see in these photos, the proboscis may be more than just a regular simple tube as well. So this is a way you can tell the difference. Male mosquitoes we normally don't see except when they're feeding on nectar on flowers. Both both male and female mosquitoes are nectar feeders primarily, and that's how they get their main sustenance as adults. The female will feed on blood to generate get enough protein to generate her eggs. And so only for a short part of their time as their lifespan does she feed on blood. Most of the time she's feeding on nectar as well. So generally male mosquitoes you're going to see primarily just associated with flowers, or they'll be attracted to lights at night. If you look close you can see that some of them are males. Sometimes the easiest way I find to find them is looking in spider webs, because they commonly get caught in there along with female mosquitoes. They're one of spiders, or web building spiders, one of the many things that eat mosquito adults. So again, mosquitoes feed primarily on flower nectar. After mating, and most insects mate very similar to the way people and other mammals do. Fertilization is internal. The eggs are fertilized and are laid. Females to find place to get blood are attracted to large dark objects. So one easy way to avoid being bitten by mosquitoes, or being less attractive to mosquitoes at least, is to wear light colored clothing. This will reduce the attractiveness. And as they get closer to us, they pick up on lactic acid and carbon dioxide to locate a place where they want to drill for blood. So land on us and drill for blood, or on other mammals and birds and reptiles and so on. The lactic acid is something that is produced associated with muscle contractions, and in fact when you exercise very heavily, my understanding is that the reason your muscles are sore is a buildup of lactic acid in your muscles. So lactic acid is produced naturally in exertion, and where we we exude that through our pores of our skin, as well as carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct of exertion as well, or just of living. And so mosquitoes use this to find us. Mosquito repellents work with the idea that they essentially clog up the receptors on the antennae of a mosquito so that they really can't pick up the lactic acid and carbon dioxide. So mosquito repellents are really not repellents. They're just anti-attractants, if you want to look at it that way, which is kind of splitting hairs. But really what it does is, the reason there's so many different kinds of repellents is because there's several different sorts of things that you can do to just kind of mess up their receptors to where they can't locate us. There are some other flies that are commonly confused with mosquitoes. Probably the most common are midges, which look essentially the same size, shape, very close in appearance to mosquitoes, except that they will many times just, one thing, they're not attracted to us. They're non-biting. They'll feed on flower nectar only. This one is a male midge. It has fuzzy antennae, but females would have slender antennae, look even more like a mosquito. Generally, midges can be separated easily from mosquitoes in that when they're sitting, they're much flatter to the surface they're sitting on than a mosquito is. They don't stand up as high. They bend their legs and crouch down, and a little bit more. It's hard to explain completely, but once you get used to knowing what a midge looks like, it's pretty easy to tell the difference. Things that look like huge mosquitoes are generally going to be crane flies, and we can get crane flies with a leg span that 2 to 3 inches across, and so they're quite large insects, and they are flower feeders as well. So they are attracted to lights at night, as are midges, and so they commonly will show up around there. Buffalo gnats have increased more recently in Illinois. They're all of the larvae of all of these insects, mosquitoes, midges, crane flies, buffalo gnats, or also known as black flies, are all aquatic, whereas mosquito larvae feed on debris hanging in the water, and midges feed on debris down in the bottom. Crane flies will feed on our micro predators, feeding in riffles of streams and so on, and around the edges of streams. Buffalo gnats are filter feeders and rely on very high quality water conditions and so on. If there's pollutants in the water, it tends to kill them because they're filtering out chemicals as well as their food. If there's too much siltation, similar thing happens. Mosquito larvae tend to feed as filter feeders too, but they're much more adaptable to nasty water. And so for many, many years, since essentially since almost 100 years ago, buffalo gnats have not been really much of a noticeable problem in Illinois, but have become so in the last 15 or 20 years as our waters are getting clean enough to actually eat the fish that you collect out of them, catch out of them, and so on. So our waters are cleaning up due to legislation and so on, and more importantly, just a change in attitude that people have. You just don't throw away your trash and garbage in the water anymore like we used to, and for hundreds of years. So so we have cleaner water now, and the buffalo gnats are coming back, and people are getting bitten by them and having problems with them and so on. But it's a byproduct of having a healthier environment. So mosquitoes do live in the water. The eggs are laid close to water or on the water surface or on dry land where they get flooded with water. Various ways that this is done. It hatches into a larva, which has a breathing tube, a siphon tube, which extends up through the surface film of the water, and the insect breathes atmospheric air. Pupae have this as well on their shoulder area. With larvae, it's at the back end of the body. And there are hydrophobic hairs on the ends of that siphon tube that keep it to where it doesn't sink through the surface tension of the water. Again, the larvae feed on debris that they filter out of the water with mouth fans, real fine strainers, and so on, and then they go into, and the larval stage, if it's disturbed, it will dive to the bottom and kind of wriggle violently. And so another name for the larval mosquito is a wriggler. The pupae are, when they're disturbed, they don't feed, they're transitioning from a larva to the adult, but they are still quite active and somewhat roundish looking with kind of a long tail on them. And when they're disturbed, they will dive to the bottom as well, but they have a tendency to spin head over heels as they do so because of their shape. And so pupae are called tumblers in common vernacular. And then when the pupa has fully developed, the adult will emerge at the surface of the water and stand on the water surface. Mosquitoes are light enough that the surface tension of the water is strong enough to support them without them falling through. And so we have wrigglers. Here are photographs of the wrigglers, elongated larvae, and the tumblers, a roundish pupae. And again, they feed on organic debris and microorganisms, and they are found pretty much in any mass of water which messes up where there's not a whole lot of predators, such as fish are primarily predators of mosquito larvae. A general rule of thumb is that if a body of water has fish in it, and the fish can get into all parts of a body of water, in other words, there's not too many plants next to the edge or something, cattails or something, that keeps the fish from getting access into that area, you really have essentially no mosquitoes coming out of that body of water, whether it's a half-acre pond or a 10,000-acre lake. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. If fish are there, there are not mosquitoes, because fish will tend to eat mosquito larvae over all other things. They just love them. So they are a tremendous biological control action. Because mosquitoes have to be able to, and both as a larva and pupae, sit there and breathe atmospheric air through this siphon tube, much in the way of wave action or current is really a problem in maintaining their position and maintaining their connection to atmospheric air. And so they don't do well in those situations. They will be in streams, but they'll be in areas where there are eddies or whatever, where the current is not so strong. There are various types of keys and so on to identify mosquitoes, and in a modern type of or a good mosquito management program, not only do they check to see whether mosquitoes are there, but what kind of mosquitoes are there. They're going to be identified by both the adult and with larval keys to identify genera and even species of mosquitoes. This is important because some mosquitoes don't feed on people. There are several adult mosquitoes whose adults feed only on frogs, for instance, or other amphibians, salamanders, etc. Some feed only on birds and don't feed on people. So it's important to know that even if you're catching a lot of mosquitoes, whether it's something that's going to be a problem to people or not, you just don't blindly spray for adult mosquitoes, because there's a lot of them there. And similarly for larvae, you can tell whether you're going to have a problem later based on the identification of those larval mosquitoes that you're collecting. Some of them may not be a problem. Some larval mosquitoes primarily eat other larval mosquitoes and are actually biological control. Unfortunately, the adults of those mosquitoes will bite people, but considering they eat a whole lot more of the other kind of mosquitoes than they are themselves, at least the number of mosquitoes that will bite people are reduced if these mosquitoes are around and doing their thing. Okay, so there are several types of mosquitoes that we essentially separate associated with their ecology, how they grow up, where they grow up, the type of lifestyle they have. And these are broken down into three main groups, large groups: floodwater mosquitoes, permanent pool mosquitoes, container breeding mosquitoes. I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. Floodwater mosquitoes are associated with floodwater. We tend to think of them as being most prevalent in the spring of the year, because that's when we tend to get a lot of our rainfall. The adult mosquitoes actually lay their eggs on dry land, but it's low-lying land, and overwinter as eggs just laying on the soil. Easily survive a couple years with like 98% hatching, 96%, something like that, and can survive for numerous other years. And as you might guess, you could end up with some eggs that are laid very low down in low-lying areas, and others that are laid kind of up on the slopes a little bit more. And so as you get continual rainfalls, you may have a rainfall that will cause some of these mosquito eggs to hatch, and then if it rains some more, the water level in these low-lying areas raises higher, and more mosquito eggs get flooded, and more larvae hatch out. So this can result in waves of adult mosquitoes later in the as these mature. And generally, under good temperature conditions, proper temperature conditions, normal temperature conditions, you're going to get adults in about 15 days after heavy rainfall. When we're bothered by these are what are called noisy biters. They will buzz by our ears, so we know they're around, and when they bite us, we can feel the bite. And so they are something that we do notice, and really increase anxiety in us. Probably the largest mosquito that occurs in Illinois is the gallonipper. It's in the genus Saurophora, and it's a very large mosquito. Its body is about a half an inch long, or close to that, 3/8 to a half an inch. And so with its long legs and so on, you're looking at something that's a good 3/4 of an inch or so. And when one of these lands on you, you know it. I mean, you can normally, when I've had them around, I normally feel them land very easily. And so they're big enough and heavy enough that people can commonly feel them land. They do provide a relatively painful bite, but thankfully they're normally not present in very high numbers. But they are a floodwater mosquito. By far, the most common floodwater mosquito we have in Illinois is the inland floodwater mosquito. The scientific name is Aedes vexans, and it doesn't carry any human diseases, but it has a feature that it is a very good flyer. It will commonly fly 15 miles, frequently 30 miles, and occasionally as much as 45 miles from where it grows up to where it bites you. Okay, and so you can have being a floodwater mosquito. One way of controlling these sorts of things is allowing good drainage and so on, so that when it rains, things drain away. Realize that these eggs are going to hatch, and they have to go through the larvae and pupal stage, and that's going to take about 2 weeks to 15 days. And so theoretically, and in reality very much so, if you have areas that flood, ditches, etc., that will drain away in the span of a week or 10 days, you really don't have mosquitoes coming out of those, because they're tied to that aquatic environment as a larva and as a pupa, and if it dries up, they're toast. They die. So that's a feature, but you can have everything kind of controlled around your area. But with inland floodwater mosquitoes, you may be getting mosquitoes from an area that's 15 to 30 miles away that you really have no responsibility or no control over. And so particularly if this is to the to the west or southwest of you with prevailing westerly to southwesterly winds. It's very common for huge numbers of these mosquitoes to come into urban areas and things of this nature from low-lying areas, poorly drained areas, well outside of town. And so this is the mosquito that when you've been out somewhere and they just become so numerous they literally drive you indoors. We're seeing that sort of situation right now. I went out yesterday afternoon to try to do some things and late afternoon, early evening, and decided that television was a better option than giving my blood for the ecology outside. So, it's a real factor associated with it. Life cycle is a typical mosquito life cycle of the inland floodwater mosquito. Eggs are laid singly on dry ground, low-lying ground. The larva sits at an angle to the water surface, and again takes about 15 days in most situations. Now we can have a situation where, again, these eggs are overwintering this way, and you can get a lot of rainfall, say in March or April, and we really don't get a mosquito problem from that because although we have the water, we don't have the temperature that they really need. When they hatch out in colder temperatures, say temperatures that are in the 50s or 60s during the daytime, and that water is relatively cool, it can take so long for those larvae to develop that they become susceptible to predation and also diseases. The longer you're in a susceptible stage, the more likely you are for somebody or some disease to eat you or kill you. And that's really what tends to happen. You can get this life cycle spread out. Remember that all insects, including mosquitoes, are cold-blooded animals, and so their temperature is what the environment is, but they develop best in temperatures in the 70s and can do quite well in the 80s, but in the 40s they almost sit there and do nothing. It really has to be above 50 degrees Fahrenheit for most insects to develop at all. And so they're just sitting there, and eventually somebody eats them or some disease kills them, and you never get a problem. And so generally what we get is that we have to have a combination of warmer weather and heavy rains, and this usually starts first in the spring in the month of May, and we can get and so usually somewhere around the middle part of May we'll have a lot of rainfall. We have had it before that, but we'll have the temperatures that are warming enough that these insects will go through their life cycle in about 2 weeks or slightly faster. And so almost always that combination occurs first around the middle of May, which means we almost always have huge numbers of biting mosquitoes out for Memorial Day weekend. We commonly also have, in fact, this mosquito is sometimes referred to by people who work on mosquito management as the holiday mosquito sometimes. Shows up in high numbers for Memorial Day. In Illinois, June is our heaviest rainfall month, and so it's common to have heavy rainfalls around in the early part of June, middle of June. And so one's around the middle of June, bingo, you've got large numbers of mosquitoes flying around biting people on the 4th of July. And then it goes very warm but relatively dry until you get about the middle of August. Then all of a sudden it starts raining again, you've got warm temperatures, and bingo, you've got huge numbers in floodwater mosquitoes for the Labor Day weekend. And so we normally look at having major impacts, particularly Memorial Day and Labor Day, many times in around the 4th of July of this insect. Again, something that buzzes your ears, you feel the bite, not really a disease transmitter to people. Here's what the larvae and the pupae look like. Their habitat is going to be areas that tend to flood, low-lying areas that don't hold the water, and for that reason you don't have much in the way of predators. Fish can't survive an area that's going to dry out. It's going to have to, and normally these are not connected to a body of water. Otherwise, that is permanent. Otherwise, you get fish coming into it and clearing them out, even when in flooded situation. You also don't get a buildup of their insect predators, such as dragonfly nymphs and damselfly nymphs and various types of water beetles and so on. You will get some predators. You can be filling up a stock tank or something, and before you got the tank filled, you normally have got water striders on it, and these will feed on mosquito larvae. So you do get some predators, but not enough to really control them all that much. Second group of mosquitoes are permanent pool mosquitoes. These are going to live in water which stays a permanent body of water. And so instead of having this huge influx all at once with the floodwater mosquitoes, you get just a constant emergence of permanent pool mosquitoes during the warmer months. Again, they need that warmer conditions. And the two most common mosquitoes that we get concerns about here are the common malaria mosquito, Anopheles quadrimaculatus, the salt marsh mosquito. Life cycle is such that the Anopheles mosquitoes, the malaria mosquitoes, actually lay eggs that have floats on the side of them. Blow up here of an egg with the black things on either side are actually floats that keep that egg floating until it hatches. The larva is interesting in that when it's sitting, at least it is to an entomologist, sitting in the water, it tends to have really no siphon to pull atmospheric air out. There's just an opening in the body, essentially. And so as a result, it lays right against the water surface, on the underneath side of the water surface, in order to get its air. So the larva is in a different position than essentially other larvae. And then the adult is different in appearance, whereas most adults, when they go to bite, the body is parallel to the skin. Anopheles are at an angle. They are almost essentially a 45-degree angle with their body to the skin. And so this angle shape, when they go to feed on us, is very distinctive and characteristic of Anopheles, mosquito that can carry malaria. Malaria, although it's not much of a problem in the U.S. anymore, it is worldwide. In that area in Africa, south of the Sahara Desert, malaria still kills 20% of the children born before they reach age 5. And so essentially, it is a tremendous impact. Similarly, a serious impact in areas in southern Asia, such as India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, these sorts of areas. Southeast Asia, a big problem there as well. Many times these are treated with bed nets that are treated with insecticide. Mosquitoes primarily feed at night, and so sleeping under a bed net that has an insecticide on it, killing the mosquito. These are very poor countries generally that have this problem, and they rely on a lot of monetary aid from richer countries such as ours. And the best thing to treat these bed nets with, as far as longevity and high level of control, is DDT. And of course, DDT has a real bad reputation in this country, because when it was sprayed heavily in the 60s and early 70s, particularly in the 60s and 50s, ended up having a problem in the ecology with birds and other top of the food chain predators, particularly predatory birds. And so we get a lot of donors, and particularly from the U.S. and to a lesser extent from Europe, that will donate money to help try to save people from malaria in these countries, but they indicate can't buy DDT with it. Well, that means you can treat a whole lot fewer bed nets, because the other insecticides are so much more expensive and have to be reapplied more often. And so you end up with, as a result of our pickiness, huge numbers of people die. Okay, and quite frankly, putting DDT on a bed net is not going to have a major factor on the ecology. So it is something where we just let our emotions get in the way of us, and people die as a result. Source reduction is what's the best method of controlling mosquitoes and malaria in particular, and that's what we did in this country more than anything else. It's harder to do in some of these third world countries, but an important thing to realize is that malaria was common in the southern half of this country until about the mid-1900s. Essentially, in the 1930s, 1940s, we had a lot of malaria, and then it was wiped out in various types of projects, particularly in the southern half of the United States, in draining areas that tended to stand with water in them. Again, this is a permanent pool of mosquitoes, so it needs areas that are too shallow to have fish in, but have permanent water in them. And education, not to be out at night, have screens on your windows, things of this nature. Don't sit outside in the evening, this sort of thing. But a major factor associated with this is we blanketed huge areas of DDT and took them out with DDT, controlling the larvae. And the adults. Larvae, a lot of times we put oil on top of the water. Things we would never do today, but in fact, it got rid of malaria in this country. And so it's something to consider. The larvae and pupae of Anopheles, the malaria mosquitoes, are relatively typical looking, except really no siphon for picking up atmospheric air. Common malaria mosquito habitat is going to be a low-lying permanent pool situation. Something, again, that doesn't support mosquitoes, but doesn't support fish, and so the mosquitoes larvae can do well in those areas and not be fed upon. Salt marsh mosquitoes we tend to think associated with coastal areas, and in fact that's where they commonly are. This is a salt marsh and off of North Carolina coast, South Carolina coast actually. It's near Charleston, South Carolina, essentially right outside Charleston, and so these sorts of habitats are conducive to that. And you say, well, we don't have salt marshes in Illinois. Well, we do have salt marsh mosquitoes that grow up around well areas, oil wells. They inject salt water into these oil wells, and there is some flow out and so on that you get these relatively permanent ponds around some of these areas, and we get salt marsh mosquito in there. So we do get salt marsh mosquitoes in Illinois from that. Some of that's associated with fracking materials. Others it's a common thing to help drive the oil or gas out by pumping in salt water. Let's take a break and answer any questions that you might have at this point before I go on with container breeding mosquitoes. Anybody got any questions?
Phil, this is Chicago.
Okay.
So did I understand you correctly that during the life cycle, if it's in the larval or pupa stage, if it dries out any of these mosquitoes, if the water source is gone, then they're dead?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the eggs can survive.
Eggs can survive depending on the type of mosquito. Probably anything other than the floodwater mosquito eggs are not likely to survive if they dry out completely. But those species will, okay, and normally do.
We have another question.
Absolutely.
Is there a field guide or a key or something that would help with identifying the types of mosquitoes?
Question was whether there's a field guide or other thing that's available to identify the types of mosquitoes. There is a the Illinois Natural History Survey sells a publication called The Mosquitoes of Illinois, which I use occasionally to identify mosquitoes with. And that's quite a good publication. There's a cost associated with it. I doubt that it's more than $5 or $6, and it's about a 30 or 40 page publication. The two pictorial keys that I showed you earlier in the presentation are produced by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and those are public domain items. They commonly will be produced, republished in books. There are places that you can find them on the internet. You could probably find them on the CDC website. So that's another possibility. The advantage I see to the one that's Illinois is you don't have to worry about all the other states in the country that the CDC's keys do. But still, they're very good keys and will work pretty well. Question here on the chat was, without DDT, what do they use to control mosquitoes? Generally, what we use to control adult mosquitoes are either malathion or various pyrethroids. Most commonly, we use permethrin, which is sold as under a brand name of Scourge for mosquito control, and also sumifrin is commonly used associated with controlling mosquitoes, and this is fogged out into areas. Interesting feature is it's relatively easy to kill an adult mosquito, and so what is used is usually about 1/5 the rate of these types of insecticides as you would use to control, say, caterpillars feeding on trees or something like that, or beetles. A fifth the rate that you would use to kill Japanese beetles or emerald ash borer adults, for instance. So although they're fogging this material over in large areas, the impact to birds is relatively small from that. You're not killing off a lot of their food supply. Many of our songbirds are insect-feeding birds. They feed a lot on caterpillars and other insects associated with trees. You're not really making a huge impact there. And generally, these types of insecticides are actually labeled for use on domestic birds, such as chickens and turkeys and so on. If fogging into the trees, you might kill some very young nestlings perhaps with this. I'm not saying there aren't any deaths, but in general, the biggest thing you're likely to do is get rid of their mites and lice that they have on them more than anything else with these sprays. That's the major impact you're going to have to birds in the fogging mechanism. For larval mosquitoes, they'll use various. There are several materials available. Some of these are insect growth regulators, which tend to control insects and not other types of critters. And then they also use Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, BTI, which is a material which kills, is specific to mosquitoes and some closely related flies. And so, important thing to realize here that, yeah, you're dumping stuff into water, but it's water, if it's got mosquitoes in it, it doesn't have fish. It doesn't have much in the way of other predatory insects, or otherwise it would take out the mosquito larvae. So you're not looking at pristine quality environments in the first place, and so the use of insecticides, even an organic material like BTI, is probably has relatively little ecological effect. Any other questions before I go on?
What about the effect on bees of these insecticides?
Almost nothing. Why can I say that so bluntly? you spray mosquitoes are primarily evening and night flying insects, and so almost all fogging is done in late afternoon to early evening to into the night. Bees orient themselves by the position of the sun in the sky, and so the you know, if they're going to get home and get home safely, they've got to be in their colony well before sunset. And so generally there's very little bee or wasp activity, even at this time in the middle of the summer, that's really going to be past 6:30 or so, which is generally they'll start fogging for mosquitoes sometimes as early as 4:30 or 5, but more commonly 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And so they're spraying when the bees ain't out. They're inside their nests, inside their hives, and domestic bees inside their hollow trees, nests, or whatever, in pharaoh honeybees and other types of bees and wasps as well. So very little impact there. And then, of course, the treatment associated, and by morning, when the bees come out at dawn, these insecticides have broken down to a great extent. We get 1 day of control, typically 1 to 2 days control with malathion, 5 or 6 or 7 days control for pyrethroids. But again, your rate is considerably lower than is going to kill the bees outright. And even if it does kill foraging bees, it's not a case of where they take anything back. They die before they get back. These are quick killing things if there's enough to kill them. If there's not enough to kill them, there seems to be very little effect from what we can tell. May knock them out, but then they come to. So these things have been studied for less than lethal effects, and have really found very little in the way of sublethal effects. And then, of course, materials used to control larvae, or the bees will go and collect water from the edges of bodies of water to cool their hive during the summertime, but they're not going to pick up much in the way of the insecticide, and they really don't. The materials that they use are really not very effective on the Hymenoptera, the order that bees and wasps are in. So probably very little effect.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about container breeding mosquitoes. These lay their eggs in stagnant water, and we tend to think of stagnant water as being things that's not moving. This is stagnant water with a capital S. Nasty water, putrid water, water that's been sitting there for weeks, and the debris that happens, rotting debris in it, has turned that water to a dark yellow or a brown color. And if you get your nose anywhere near it, you get your sinuses cleaned out. I mean, it reeks. This is what they like to lay their eggs into. And if we get frequent rains, it will actually dilute that putrid quality to the point that they don't want to lay their eggs in it. They reduce their egg laying. And so the situations that we're going through in essentially most of Illinois right now, where we're having frequent rains and have all through the season, we get very little in the way of container breeding mosquitoes developing. There are some, but not a whole lot. I mean, it's just, to be blunt about it, the water just is too nice. It's not nasty enough. They don't like it. And so we don't get much in the way of container breeding mosquitoes when it rains a lot. And that's neat, because the container breeding mosquitoes are our disease transmitting mosquitoes. And so when we get a lot of rainfall, our likelihood of getting diseases transmitted by mosquitoes goes way down. It doesn't eliminate, but it goes way down. In a natural situation, these mosquitoes would lay their eggs in tree holes and old hollowed out tree stumps and things of this nature that would collect water and get really nasty. But people really have made their life a lot easier, because we have a lot of artificial containers that these mosquitoes just literally love. Clogged gutters, old tires, bird baths, abandoned swimming pools, water lily pools that don't have anything to feed on the mosquito larvae, uh, you know, wheelbarrows sitting out, wading pools, tin cans, old tires, you know, cars in junkyards, old abandoned vehicles, abandoned anything that will hold water is a source. In fact, abandoned swimming pools are such a major source that in major metropolitan areas, mosquito control companies will have will own helicopters, and they can do some larviciding, treating pools of water that are hard to get to any other way, with insecticides to kill mosquito larvae. But probably their major purpose is to fly over areas and to identify abandoned swimming pools. As you get around in the summertime, it's pretty easy to pick these up because they're green with algae, instead of being in good shape. And there are tremendous numbers of abandoned swimming pools. I think there's been some, depending on the community, typically 1/3 to 2/3 of all the swimming pools in a city are abandoned and are mosquito sources. It's that common. It's very, very common. And of course, there's all sorts of reasons why this happens. You know, I buy a house from somebody that likes a swimming pool. I don't have any use for a swimming pool. I'm not going to pay for the electricity and stuff. I just sit in my backyard. Maybe you got a swimming pool when your kids were young. Now they've grown up and they're dating, and maybe they've left home and they're in college, or they're out with a job or something, and they're not coming home and using a swimming pool. You got no use for it, and so it's expensive to get rid of, so you just let it sit there. Or the pump dies on it in the swimming pool, filtration, and it's expensive to fix it. So rather than do anything, you just leave it there. This is exceedingly common, very, very common, okay? A major problem in urban areas. Carp and koi, which are essentially colored carp, are not very good mosquito feeders, but most other fish are, including goldfish. And so, again, if you have fish in your pool, you don't have mosquito problems. One of the container breeding mosquitoes that is relatively recent to Illinois is the Asian tiger mosquito. It flies during the day and it bites during the day. It is something that's we got it from Japan, and other parts of Asia in the 1980s, apparently primarily due to shipments of used tires from Asia, particularly Japan, to this country to recap. Now you would think of all the automobiles in the United States, there would never be any reason to import old tires that are worn out. But believe it or not, they do that. I was just confounded when I heard this. But apparently it's very common. They were introduced into Illinois directly that way, into the Kankakee area, into the East St. Louis area, by shipments from overseas of old tires. Initial transmissions were into Texas, but we import so many tires from Asia that it happened repeatedly. If you've ever known, you really can't get all the water out of a tire by dumping it over. There's always some water that stays in the tire. That's the way the tire's made. And so we end up getting a problem with this mosquito, which can transmit some things that are really nasty diseases. Dengue is a disease which is common in the Caribbean. Causes blood to come out of your pores of your skin and some things like that. Really nasty disease. But now we have a transmitter. We didn't have anything native that would transmit it apparently, but we do now. La Crosse encephalitis could be transmitted farther with this mosquito, and there's a laundry list of diseases that this mosquito can transmit. So it's kind of a problem, and it will reproduce in any little piece of body of water. They found mature larvae and pupae in the 80s when this first out in a cellophane wrappers from cigarette packets. That small of a body of water. A couple cubic inches of water is enough for these mosquitoes to grow up. And so there's lots of little cavities in old cars and as well as tires and stuff that will produce these. And so they do have striped legs like this, and a stripe running down behind their head, which is very diagnostic of this mosquito. So it's pretty easy to identify if you know what you're looking at. Eastern trio mosquito is a native mosquito associated with wooded areas. Obviously, it likes tree holes. It doesn't do as much reproducing in other bodies of water, and where it does, it needs a fairly good, long-lasting body of water. It will come out many times in early spring when it takes quite a long larval time because of a cold water. And so, so for this reason, it can show up earlier in the year than in some cases. It does transmit lacrosse encephalitis, also known as California encephalitis, and we have an endemic disease situation in the Peoria, Illinois area. Every year we have a few cases of lacrosse encephalitis in that area, and almost all of it is associated with a particular park just north of Peoria. Like 95% of the cases come out of that park. So we know where it is, we know how it happens. It's transmitted from rodents, particularly ground squirrels, and the mosquito bites the ground squirrel and then picks up the encephalitis and then will transmit it to people. Okay, and occasionally we have an Illinoisan die from this. We have a handful of cases every year, depending on the years, 5 to 10 to 30 to 40, almost all out of this same park near Peoria. So it's the mosquito doesn't fly very far, so it doesn't transmit the disease very far, and we apparently have an endemic disease of that disease is endemic in those ground squirrels in that particular area. The big problem mosquito as a container mosquito is the northern house mosquito, Culex pipiens. This is a mosquito which transmits pretty much every nasty disease that we want to think about transmitted by mosquitoes. It transmitted St. Louis encephalitis, and it figured out how to handle West Nile virus too. So it's our main transmitter of these diseases, which are the major diseases in Illinois and the U.S. It has a relatively short flight range, typically less than half a mile. Rarely more than a mile, and never more than a mile and a half for all practical purposes. What's that mean? That means that if you get West Nile virus, you probably got it from a mosquito that either you raised or one of your close neighbors raised. And so neighborhood source reduction works great for this mosquito. Working to make sure gutters are cleaned out, to turn any old tires sitting out, that bird baths are dumped and cleaned, washed out once a week. All other types of water out, pet water bowls are dumped and rinsed out once a week, outdoor ones, things of this nature that this mosquito could easily develop in, you can easily control. So it is something that if you get the disease, you probably raised a mosquito or your neighbor next door did. It's a quiet biter. It doesn't buzz by your ear. You don't feel the bite typically. It's a mosquito that in the second half of the summer, you kind of look down here and there's this little brown mosquito just drilling away on your pant leg. And it doesn't make any difference whether you got long trousers on or not, it'll go right through the cloth. So shorts or trousers doesn't make a whole lot of difference to it. And you normally don't feel anything. That's the one that's likely to transmit West Nile virus to you. Overwinters as an adult, and so if you get a warm day in January or February and you get bit by a mosquito, there's a real good chance it's northern house mosquito. Are you going to get West Nile virus in the middle of winter from a northern house mosquito? Very, very unlikely. Why is that? Although the mosquito may come out on a warm day, say at temperatures in the mid-60s or high 50s or something like this, and bite you, it probably doesn't have enough West Nile virus or St. Louis encephalitis particles in its salivary glands that it's injecting into you to give you the disease. It takes a certain level of virus particles to cause a disease. Anything less than our own immune system takes them out. And so for this reason, we really don't have much of a problem from that in the winter. And the reason there's not very many in the winter is that the West Nile virus and the St. Louis encephalitis, for that matter, needs temperatures at least in the 70s to reproduce well itself inside the mosquito and cause what's called a viremia, which means a high number of virus particles that when the mosquito bites us, it pumps in saliva from its salivary glands, which has an anticoagulant in it to keep the blood flowing, and that will carry the virus particles associated with it. And so that's it's really a bad thing if you're a mosquito and you have blood clot in your proboscis. I mean, you're going to starve to death. So they use this anticoagulant to keep the blood flowing, and in the process of pumping that into the wound, they pump in the virus. This is also why you really can't get HIV or AIDS from a mosquito bite. The reason is that the HIV virus does not reproduce inside the mosquito. And so all it can transmit is the amount of blood that happens to be remaining in its proboscis that it might accidentally get into your body when it goes to feed on you. And that's too few of particles, apparently, to cause HIV to develop. We have never had any connection with mosquito bites to HIV transmission. You say, well, you can get HIV from a dirty needle. Yes, but the inside of a hypodermic needle has tremendously more blood in it than the proboscis of a mosquito. And so it's a matter of amount that makes a difference. Northern house mosquito life cycle is very typical of most mosquitoes. Eggs are laid in rafts, which contain a number of eggs in them, tens of eggs, and will hatch. They float on the water surface and hatch, and the larvae grow up and pupate and then come out as adults. And the adults, when they're biting, they bite with the top of their body essentially horizontal to the skin, just like inland floodwater mosquitoes and most other mosquitoes except for malaria mosquitoes. These are the egg rafts that they produce. They're typically, about a quarter of an inch long, or an eighth of an inch long, and a 16th of an inch wide, I should say. Relatively small. You can see a dead male mosquito next to one. Has fuzzy antennae. These are the egg rafts that they produce. They're pretty easily seen if you look close. This mosquito will transmit St. Louis encephalitis, West Nile virus, and Western equine encephalitis. All three of these diseases are primarily bird diseases. And interestingly enough, in the spring of the year, the most dominant Culex mosquito that we have in Illinois is Culex restuans. Culex restuans has no common name, but it feeds only on birds. And so it will transmit these viruses from bird to bird, but not from birds to mammals, humans or other mammals. Typically right around the third week in June in most years. It goes from being very cool and damp and wet with lots of rainfall to which Culex restuans likes. It lays its eggs in fresher water, cleaner water, to hot, dry conditions in which that stagnant water really gets putrid and nasty smelling. And that's when the northern house mosquito, Culex pipiens, takes off. And it tends to become the dominant Culex mosquito from about the middle of June all the way through into the fall of the year. That mosquito bites both birds and humans and other mammals. And so in the process transmits these diseases. Western equine encephalitis is not much of a problem in humans. Neither really is St. Louis encephalitis or West Nile virus. Western equine is less of a problem than either of those. West Nile virus and Western equine encephalitis is a problem more to horses. Okay. So Culex restuans transmits between birds in cooler spring weather. Then we get northern house mosquito doing most of the more numerous later in the year. Now Culex pipiens overwinters, and so does restuans, by a matter of fact, overwinters as adults in protected areas, hollow trees. You get into southern Illinois, or in much of Illinois where there are caves. It's southern Illinois and the drift-free area in northern Illinois where the glaciers did not go and didn't smash all the caves. You have these mosquitoes overwintering in there, and so you can get bit by a northern house mosquito transmitting West Nile virus in the spring, but it's much more likely once it turns from spring to summer, latter part of June on, July, August. Particularly in August is the heavy time. They're out in September transmitting too, but television has convinced, and everybody, and school calendars do, that once Labor Day weekend is over, it's time to go inside, watch the new TV shows, and the kids have to study for school homework, and so we just don't spend much time outside after Labor Day. And although we have Culex pipiens, northern house mosquito, carrying West Nile virus, we get very little transmission in September and October because we've been convinced by our school districts and by television that it's not a good time to be outside, so we stay inside even though it's nice weather. So not very much in the way of transmission then, because we're inside in the evening. And so we get more human cases in hot, dry years. And West Nile virus is not just transmitted by northern house mosquito, but many different types of mosquitoes, including other genera. It can also be transmitted by ticks, but in Illinois it's primarily northern house mosquito we worry about. Its reservoir are essentially most wild birds, and they're what we call amplifier hosts from our standpoint. In reality, they are the main hosts, the primary hosts, and when it gets into a human or another mammal, it's a dead-end host. Not a dead end in the fact that the human or other mammal is going to die, but the dead end from the point that the virus is going to die, because it's not a very likely situation. We're not going to create a viremia that will infect a mosquito, which will take it back to a bird. It just doesn't go backwards very well. Not all birds can handle this West Nile virus. The corvids, which include the crows and the blue jays, there's a very high mortality rating associated with that. In some areas of the country where they've gotten West Nile virus, they have essentially lost all their crows. They've died from West Nile virus. Illinois, we don't see that. People are still trying to figure out why, but apparently somehow there's some resistance, or they're just healthier, or whatever. I don't know what it is. Nobody does. And West Nile virus is moved primarily by migratory birds. Interesting feature is that crows, where most birds migrate north to south, crows tend to migrate east to west, and west to east. And so crows have been looked at as being primarily responsible for moving West Nile virus from its initial entrance into this country in the New York City area throughout the rest of the country. It's gone all the way to the West Coast, I believe, now. West Nile fever, the human disease features are kind of flu-like symptoms. You get a fever with it, headache, sore throat, backache, joints ache, feel tired, can get some rash. And being an encephalitis disease, the term encephalitis means that it causes your brain and spinal cord to increase in size, to swell up, and so that's a feature associated with it. Most people that get West Nile virus, and St. Louis encephalitis for that matter, don't show any symptoms of the illness. Probably at least 85 to 90%. Some numbers are as high as 97% of people who get West Nile virus don't show any signs of any problem associated with it. And so there's a good likelihood that practically everybody that's listening to me right now has West Nile virus in them. It's just It's just probably pretty a common thing. And there's some indication that if you get West Nile virus, you become immune to it for at least a year or two, apparently. And most people that die from this disease, develop the disease and die from it, are older people that have some other later in life situations associated with it. And since I'm well over 50 years old, I tend to have a little bit of a problem with that. But there is also the idea that, when you're really healthy, if you get the West Nile virus, you get some immunity that the next time you get it the next year, you've got some immunity that helps you handle it and all this sort of stuff. Maybe you're not so susceptible to it. We don't know that for sure, but that's a theory. When you look at the human West Nile cases in Illinois, first year it got into the country, into Illinois in large numbers was in 2002. That happened to be a hot, dry summer. Hot, dry summers are conducive to northern house mosquito. They like that hot, dry conditions. The water gets real stagnant. They develop quickly in hotter conditions, warmer conditions. Being a cold-blooded animal, the virus does well. By the way, where you get interesting feature is that where you get West Nile virus in an area, it tends to push St. Louis encephalitis out of the picture. So you may have thought, here he's talking about St. Louis encephalitis. I haven't heard anything in the paper for years about that, since probably about in 2002. And that's been a pattern across the country, is that where West Nile virus comes in, St. Louis encephalitis disappears. And so apparently there's some sort of competition, if you will, disease-wise. We don't quite understand that as well. At least I don't understand that. I'm not familiar with that. But really, when you have West Nile virus, you no longer worry about St. Louis encephalitis. Well, you worry about it. The public health does, but your likelihood of getting it are pretty slim. So the first year we got it into the state, 2002, in large numbers. It was a hot, dry year. Lots of West Nile virus. Lots of people that were perhaps in poor health from something else and got West Nile virus and died. So we lost 67 Illinoisans in 2002 to West Nile virus. The first fatal case in Illinois is indicative of a type of thing that I guess you kind of look at and kind of shake your head. This was a person in Westmont in the Chicago area who had a kidney transplant, was on anti-rejection drugs, which meant these people are much more sensitive to the common cold and flu and other viruses. And then he had this interesting habit of he had essentially a high fenced yard, and he liked to sleep outside on his chase lounge in the summertime in the nude. So you have a person in their 50s that is very susceptible to getting viral diseases and is sleeping outside without any clothes on, just essentially being a feeding target for mosquitoes, and he was the first one to die in this state. You kind of look at it and go, duh. But at any rate, that's a feature. Now, think about what the summers were last year, well, particularly 2 years ago in 2012. Hot and dry. 12 people died in the state of Illinois. A very conducive year to northern house mosquito. Think about the weather we had last year, 2013. It was very wet the first half of the summer. Lots of rain, cooler temperatures, thought it was never going to stop raining. Come around about the 1st of July, somebody turned the faucet off. We got very little rain in the second half of 2013 and very hot conditions. Temperatures approaching 100 degrees through most of the state. Bingo, 11 people die from West Nile virus. The 4-5 previous years tended to have more timely rains throughout the summer, a little bit cooler conditions, but certainly more rainfall. Very few deaths in 3 of those years. No reported deaths at all from West Nile virus. And the 2 years after 2002, made a big concern about it, public health, and then people tended to forget about it because the next 2 years were rainy in the summertime. Northern house mosquito didn't do very well, didn't have as many out, very few deaths, and then people got complacent, it got dry and hot, more deaths. So hot, dry years, more mosquito deaths from West Nile virus. Mosquitoes do better. Again, West Nile virus and St. Louis encephalitis are bird diseases, and so one way of early detection of these viruses is to check birds. They're going to have it in them first. So you can net wild birds and pull out a blood sample. My wife used to do this when we lived in the Chicago area in the 1980s. The company she worked for was under contract to City of Chicago, and what she did was she put up mist nets in cemeteries in Chicago, collected netted birds, pulled out a blood sample from their jugular vein, and let them go. Okay, took out a small enough amount that it was not a problem even to a house sparrow, very small birds, and made sure that they were in good shape, had a recovery thing and a whole this sort of thing, recovery box if they didn't seem to be in real good shape. Robins had a tendency to go a little shocky. She'd let them sit for a while and they'd come around and let them go. And or you can also just put out chickens in a coop that has good open mesh on it, and mosquitoes will come in, transmit West Nile virus. You can pick them up that way. Excuse me. And so and similarly, this is a way that you can tell. You can also check the larvae of mosquitoes and determine whether they have West Nile virus in them or not. These are all factors that can be done as an early detection thing for it. And again, it has to build. Typically, it builds up in the mosquitoes, in the birds, before it's high enough in amount to really start being found in humans and other mammals. And again, the virus doesn't survive getting into a mammal, human or other mammal, and so it's a dead-end host for those. There is a high mortality in horses. I think it's somewhere around 30% of horses that get West Nile virus die from it. There is a vaccine that's been developed for horses, and so there is not a vaccine for humans, probably because there's such a low mortality in other mammals, including people. But there is a vaccine for West Nile virus for horses, has been for 10 years or so, or more. So we try to control northern house mosquito by controlling some of these container breeding sites. Apparently, essentially, if it turns green, it's good water for northern house mosquito to breed in. Container breeding mosquitoes. Discarded tires, catch basins. A lot of communities have programs in which they hire people to go around and throw Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis briquettes or the Altosid briquettes, which are essentially hormone analogs that mess up the mosquitoes, into catch basins. Hire a lot of college kids and so on. Many of them will run around, do this on bicycle, and just drop them into the catch basins to control northern house mosquito in these locations. That's a way of reducing the problem. Dog heartworm is transmitted by a variety of mosquitoes directly from dog or other mammal to dogs or cats. There's 16 mosquitoes identified as natural hosts for dog heartworm in Illinois, eastern half U.S. anyway, including the Asian tiger mosquito, inland floodwater mosquito, malaria mosquito, salt marsh mosquito. Dogs also get dog heartworm, but not as frequently as dogs, and normally it's not as severe to cats. Cats usually show up as just not having much in the way of energy and tend to be a little bit sluggish, etc. are good clues that cat may have dog heartworm. We started looking at moving on to mosquito control efforts, mosquito abatement districts, citywide mosquito programs, countywide mosquito programs. They do surveys. They will survey an area. Much of this is done by air particularly helicopters, but also on ground, looking for areas that tend to flood during rain events, areas that are bodies of water that are kind of choked with debris or plants and so on, to where if there are fish there, they can't get into the shallows to control mosquitoes. These sorts of things are mapped, and when you have a situations where mosquitoes are likely to be produced, they will go out and at least sample for mosquito larvae in these areas to see what's going on, and typically larvicide, which is using insecticides of various type to control the mosquito larvae, so you don't have to do fogging to control the adult mosquitoes. These would also be areas that might be of prime consideration for either draining so they do not hold water, or deepening so that fish can live in them, and management of vegetation around the edges and shallow areas, reducing the shallow areas so that fish can, if they're in that body of water, can control the mosquitoes and eliminate them as being a mosquito producing location. And so we can go out there with these dippers, a little dipper on the end of a long pole, and you can don't have to get usually into the water quite so much to get a sample of what's there. And they will pick up larvae or pupae and can identify what kind of mosquitoes are there. They can analyze them for carrying West Nile virus, and so they can get a early warning system associated with this. They can use oviposition traps. This is one for Culex mosquitoes. Ovipositing is a fancy word for laying eggs. And again, remember that this is a container breeding mosquitoes, so they'll go into a container with nasty water in it. So you take a 5-gallon bucket, you put a lid on it to keep the rain out so it doesn't get too fresh. You have holes a couple inches in diameter in the sides. The mosquitoes can fly in. You have a water level in it and debris to create what's called an infusion. Many old mosquito people, their favorite thing to use is sheep manure for this. You can use oak leaves is used a lot. Commonly hay is used. But something that will actually mix with water will create a real nasty, foul-smelling, foul-looking material that Culex mosquitoes will lay egg rafts on, and then you can tell with a mosquito larvae in there what mosquitoes are out and prevalent, and whether it's switched from Culex restuans to the northern house mosquito, Culex pipiens, going from one that feeds just on birds to feeds also on humans and horses and so on. And so these are all mechanisms that are used to kind of help figure out what's going on. Probably more commonly are light traps, and the most common one used is New Jersey light trap. This requires a power source, and essentially it has a fan in it and a light, which is run by the electricity, and it sucks in mosquitoes as they are attracted to the light at night. And the nuisance threshold is 30 female mosquitoes caught per night. Many mosquito abatement districts will analyze these traps and identify what the mosquitoes are. When I need a mosquito adult identified, I usually pick on my wife, because she worked for as I mentioned earlier, she worked for a mosquito control company, trapping birds and taking blood samples. When she wasn't doing that, she was identifying adult mosquitoes. So she's very good at identifying adult mosquitoes, better than I am. So I just hand the mosquito to her. She tells you what it is. So these are commonly put out and helps determine whether sprays need to be used to control the adult mosquitoes. Centers for Disease Control, CDC miniature light trap, is something that is small enough that you can use just batteries, so you can use in more remote areas. You can add dry ice in it, which of course as it thaws will subliminate to carbon dioxide gas, which is attractant to mosquitoes, and they can tell whether what kind of mosquitoes are out that might be a problem this way. Mosquito repellents are available. DEET is the old standby. That's a synthetic material, so is picaridin. These are available in commercial mosquito control products. So is oil of lemon eucalyptus. All of these are effective. Again, while they work, is primarily clogging up the sensory apparatus of a mosquito, so when it comes in close to you to land, it can't figure out where you are because it can't pick up CO2, carbon dioxide, and lactic acid. Some herbals are effective, but the main difference is they don't last very long, and also being an organic material, they fall outside the requirements for testing for safety. And realize that the strongest poisons, some of the strongest poisons known to us, are botanical. They're natural, and so just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe by a long, long, long stretch. But our rules in this country allow these to be actually sold for mosquito repellents without having any tests whatsoever to see if they're going to be harmful to people. Some herbals are cancer-causing materials and other things. Garlic will repel mosquitoes. They also repel people. And so people can take garlic tablets or something like this. Garlic will be exuded from the pores of their skin, and that will repel mosquitoes, but it also repels people. And so it's I love gyros, but I can only have those if I'm going to be gone for at least 2 nights, so that the garlic no longer comes out of my body. Otherwise, I get complained about with at night in bed. So the wife doesn't put up with that. So, at any rate, there are some vitamins, B vitamins particularly, that in some people repel mosquitoes. In other people, they have been found by research to actually attract mosquitoes. And many people, it makes no difference whatsoever. And so just because you take some sort of a B vitamin that works well for you doesn't mean that your friend will act that well as well. Some people are more attractive to mosquitoes than others, and that has to do with probably the amount of CO2 being produced, lactic acid. Somebody that's been exercising is going to be more attractive. Somebody who is not, they're producing more of these products. Some people's body chemistry is just different. I found out quite early in life that if I was being bothered by mosquitoes and my father was around, all I had to do was go stand next to him. I no longer had a problem because they all went to him. And so, here I have half his genes, but I didn't get his mosquito attracting ability. If you have an outside barbecue or something like this, perhaps probably the best thing that you can use is a fan that'll blow across. Mosquitoes need a very low wind speed to be able to actually hover and land to feed on us. And so even a window fan or something like that blowing across tends to blow them off course, and you really don't have much of a problem. Most fish are effective in controlling mosquitoes. Goldfish, mosquito fish are commonly put in areas to control mosquitoes. Goldfish are commonly in water lily ponds and so on. Fathead minnow and golden shiners are listed here because they're the 2 most common bait minnows you can go to a bait shop and buy. And for $1.50 you can get a dozen of these, throw them in a pond for the summer, and you've got summer-long mosquito control. Other minnows work well. Most other fish work well, except again carp or colored carp, painted carp, also known as koi. They don't work very well. They will feed on some mosquitoes, particularly the younger ones, but not near as much as these other fish do. Bug zappers and sonic devices are essentially not effective. They will attract male and female mosquitoes both from a long distance, but a female mosquito that's looking for a blood meal will be attracted to your vicinity by the trap, but then will not go all the way to the trap. They will then start looking for a blood meal. So it actually, if you have a bug zapper in your yard, you are more apt to be bitten by mosquitoes than if you did not have one. Been proven over and over and over and over again. The female mosquitoes that go to a bug zapper and get killed are ones that have already emptied their ovaries. They cannot lay any more eggs anymore, old ones, and so they're not a problem anyway. They're not going to be looking for a blood meal. They do tend to attract a lot of beneficial insects. Predatory insects such as ground beetles are caught in large numbers by these things, which feed on other insects, many of them harmful insects. They catch a lot of moths. Some of those are the adults of caterpillars that feed on beneficial plants, but many of them are adults of caterpillars that feed on weeds. So you get more weed problems associated with these. Sonic devices that produce a sound which is supposed to imitate the high-pitched sound of a male mosquito and drives females away because they don't want to mate with them again, or dragonfly sounds, wing beat sounds. Another common name for a dragonfly is a mosquito hawk. They feed on mosquitoes and small midges and other small flies like that. These things have been shown through research to be essentially totally ineffective. Once in a great while, you'll find one device that does a little bit somewhere. Suffice to say that the ones that we have in the United States that are sold were developed in Asia. And if they have any effect, they work on Asian mosquitoes, not ours. Traps and repellents, carbon dioxide traps will attract mosquitoes and have controls mosquitoes in limited areas. You can buy citronella geraniums and mosquito geraniums, scented geraniums. These have essentially no effectiveness if you're more than 2 or 3 feet from a plant. Same goes for citronella torches, but if you're sitting in the smoke from it, you won't have any of the mosquitoes. That's what the Native American Indians did to avoid mosquitoes, as they sat downwind of a fire in the smoke and didn't have a problem with mosquitoes. So if you want to have your eyes burned, from the smoke, you won't have mosquito problems. There are various types of portable sprayers that are used associated with controlling larvae in remote locations. Many of these things are out away from places and hard to get to with any type of a ground rig, any type of wheeled vehicle. There are ATV vehicles that can be used for fogging adult mosquitoes or for treating for larvae as well in some of those areas. There are truck-mounted foggers that will go down streets and spew out again, the insecticide to kill the adult mosquitoes. We would much rather, it's more effective to control the larvae, either by insecticides or by drainage and so on, or biological control, fish, etc. And there are ULV units which put out a very fine, small amount of very fine droplets which drift into areas and provide adult mosquito control as well. There's another unit, and close-up of the fan unit that blows uses the air from a fan to help move the insecticide out to control. And so that's what I wanted to say about mosquitoes and viruses and diseases and so on. Be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, this is Chicago again, Phil.
Huh?
This is Chicago
Yes.
again. Okay, go ahead.
I have a question about I do my gardening in large self-watering containers.
Need a little bit closer to the microphone. I can't hear it.
She does her gardening in self-watering containers.
So
Okay.
reservoir of water in the
Many of the things, such as those used for self-watering containers, such as put around these bags that will leak water out around trees and so on, usually can be closed off the top to keep mosquitoes out of them, so
yeah,
they don't
not
lay
the
eggs.
pots. They have a hole where you put the water in every day, so it's open.
Like an earth box.
Yeah, it's like an earth box. A little
Okay.
bit different model is what I use. So it's not a huge hole, but it's certainly big enough for mosquitoes to get in.
Well, you're probably breeding mosquitoes in there.
Well, I don't know if the water gets scummy. I'm adding water to it
Yeah,
every
it
day.
may be fresh enough that it's not much of a factor. There was a question related somewhat to that a couple of days ago about rain barrels, and kind of blew me away because every rain barrel I've seen has had window screening across the top so that you divert the material, the water from the downspout through a screening. I have two rain barrels and they both work that direction, and that keeps mosquitoes out. But if you don't have any mesh or anything to keep the mosquitoes out, then the mesh will help keep them out. Similar thing could be the case with these self-watering containers, although it may be also a factor that I would think ideally for the health of a plant, the water in the reservoir should run dry before it's restored. Otherwise, you're going to have probably some rotting root systems. So if they're used properly, they should dry. I would guess they would dry out in between, and that would eliminate the mosquito larvae if there were any in it. And your point about it being fresher is probably a good option.
I wondered too if there's anything I could put in the water that would deter them, that would be not harmful to the plants, which I'm going to eat.
Yeah. Well, there are the BTI is available as a granular material that could be applied into that water and help reduce the problem. And that's a organic rated material, so it should be, at least the BTK. The other BTs are. I'm sure this one is too.
Should be safe even on edible plants.
Yeah, right. Shouldn't be a problem. It's not systemic, so it shouldn't get up into anything that you're eating. On the chat, we have, do those wristbands or off fans work? For a few inches right next to them. If I'm not mistaken, the post office has been looking at both of those with the possibility of going after for mail fraud. They're really not really effective, despite what the ads say. It's kind of like a flea collar on your dog. It doesn't do much to the back end of a dog unless they sleep with their tail next to their head. Same idea. If someone sprayed my garden with black fly permethrin, can I harvest and eat the vegetables? If it's not labeled for about the only thing we can respond from an extension point of view is that if it's not labeled for use on that vegetable, you can eat vegetables from that garden next year. You have just ruined that season's production. And so our stance from University of Illinois Extension is that if garden or fruit has been sprayed with an unlabeled material, does not have a harvest interval for that crop, it cannot be used for that growing season. Okay. Now, when they go down the road and they spray, those things are labeled for use on plants, on vegetables. So fogging is not really a problem, but we do have people. Almost every year I get a call from somebody who, oh, my lawn care service said they just help us out by spraying their lawn chemical on my vegetable garden. What do I do? I said, plant grass, till it up. They just screwed you over. So, okay. Any other questions?
We have a question in Fayette County.
Sure.
We'd like to know where the park is in Peoria. Name of it.
I don't know it. My understanding is it's north of there somewhere, and it's a relatively rustic, fairly large area that people do camping and so on in. But I don't know the name of a park. I don't know that. I think maybe I've heard it once or twice, but it's never stayed with me, and I've never bothered to try to remember it for very obvious reasons. But if somebody wanted to call the Peoria County Public Health District, they could probably find out which park it is.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Thank you for your attention and participation. This ends the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.